Welcome to the Muscular System video lecture. Let's start by looking what is a muscle. So a muscle is a group of specialised elastic tissues. More of the human body is made up of muscle than any other type of tissue. In fact, 23% of a woman's body weight is actually made up of muscle and 40% of a man's is made up of muscle. Muscle tissue is bound together in bundles and contained in a sheath. At the end of this sheath, it extends to form a tendon which attaches the muscle to other parts of the body. Muscle is 75% water, 20% proteins, 5% fats, minerals, salts and glycogen. The function of a muscle is to contract, and by doing this, a movement in the surrounding structures will follow, so the tendons, ligaments and eventually the bones. The muscle contracts in reaction to a nerve stimulus sent by the brain through a motor nerve. The muscle will then become shorter and fatter at the centre. So what does a muscle actually look like? There are three types of muscle tissue, each with a different type of structure. So we're going to start with skeletal muscle. These are the muscles which we consciously control. Skeletal muscle has cylindrical cells which make up the fibres. Each fibre has several nuclei and it's surrounded by a sheath. The muscle fibres form bundles and they run in the same direction. Actually, if you looked under a microscope, this muscle will look quite stripy. The stripes are actually formed by actin and myosin protein filaments, and they run across the fibre in transverse bands. When the actin and myosin cross, a darker stripe is created. When they appear lighter, it means that they actually haven't gone across each other. When the muscle contracts, the actin filaments slide between the myosin filaments, which causes a shortening and thickening of the fibres. The next type of muscle we're going to look at is smooth muscle. Smooth muscles have a spindle-shaped cells with no distinct membrane, and it only has one nucleus. The bundles of fibres form the muscles we see with the naked eye. The function of smooth muscles is that it is the muscles we do not consciously control. So an example would be in the walls of the blood and the lymph vessels. The last muscle that we're going to be looking at is cardiac muscle. It only exists in the heart. It is an involuntary muscle tissue, but its fibres are straighted and each cell has one nucleus. So in structure, it actually resembles skeletal muscle. The function of cardiac muscle is to pump the action of the heart. So let's look at now how muscles actually work. So by contraction, the fibres become shorter and thicker, and the parts attached to the fibres are pulled by the contraction and move. When a muscle fibre contracts, it follows the all or nothing law. So it contracts completely or not at all. Varying forces or strengths are produced depending upon the number of fibres actually used. The greater the number of fibres that contract, the greater the force produced. Smooth muscles and cardiac muscles contract independently of our conscious will, and skeletal muscles, however, move because we want them to. There are two types of contraction. Isometric. As the muscle contracts, its length remains the same whilst the tension increases in an attempt to overcome the opposite force. Or isotonic, which is as the muscle contracts, its length changes whilst the tension remains constant or developing to overcome the opposing force. So how does muscle movement actually happen? In skeletal muscles, a muscle needs to pass over a joint to create movement. Muscle contraction pulls one bone towards another, which moves the limb. Muscles will never work alone, so any movement results from the action of several muscles working together. In general, muscles work in pairs, so each pair contains the contracting muscle, which is the agonist, and the antagonist, which is the relaxing muscle. The agonist and the antagonist muscle contract and relax equally to make sure that the movement is smooth and doesn't jerk. The stimulus to contract comes from the nervous system through the nerves, and it's the motor nerves that enter the muscles and break into many different nerve endings. Each one of the nerve endings will stimulate a single muscle fibre. So for the muscle to actually work, it needs to get its energy. And this must be with an adequate blood supply, which will provide your oxygen and nutrients and will remove the carbon dioxide and waste products from the energy production. Muscles receive their nutrients and oxygen from the arterial capillaries. This is converted into energy by chemical changes. The nutrients and oxygen are used up by the muscle, and the waste product lactic acid is then excreted into the venous blood system. For the muscle's ability to contract, it's affected by different factors. So the energy available, the strength of the stimulus from the nerve, the time the muscle's been contracting, the blood supply, which needs to bring enough oxygen and nutrients, the strength of the nerve supply, the temperature, as the warmth will increase the response, and the presence of products like waste products such as your lactic acid. Different stages of contraction, so we're looking at your tone then, with a slight degree of contraction by some fibres as others are relaxing. So in normal healthy muscles there will always be a few muscle fibres contracting at any one time. So this will even happen during sleep. This action gives a normal relaxed posture to the body. In relaxation, a lessening of tension, so a reduction in the number of fibres contract at one time. So your muscle tension can be affected by conscious effort, and the relaxation thought can have to be taught. So if you have overcontraction, it can cause problems within the muscles. It can create muscle tension and muscle fatigue. Let's now look at the terms of descriptions for muscles. So the origin is the fixed end of a muscle. The end of the muscle barely moves during muscle action. The insertion is the moving end of the muscle, which is the point to which the force of the muscle is directed. The attachment at the origin and insertion muscles attach to bones via your tendons to produce the movement of joints. And the belly is actually the thickest part of the muscle. Other terms that we need to be looking at is your flexion, which bends or flexes a limb inward. Extension bends or extends the limb outward. Abduction moves the limb away from the midline of the body. Adduction moves the limb towards the midline of the body. Inversion is turning towards the centre. Rotation is rotating at the neck. Eversion is turning outwards or away from the centre line of the body. Supination is turning a limb to face upwards. Dorsiflexion is bending the foot up. Pronation is turning a limb down, and your plantar flexion is bending or flexing the foot downwards. You'll be looking at the different types of muscles, their position and action in actually your work folders.